Today, I'm going to teach you step by step how to make a super cute vintage Christmas wreath. Here's a hint. We're going to be using a finial. Hey guys, it's Nikki here at Stillwater's Wreath Designs. If you're new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We've got new tutorials uploading every single week. And you can find a full materials list for you below in the description of this video. You can also find my Etsy link if you'd like to snag this for your front door. Okay guys, let's dive in. We'll be making the wreath on a 15-inch work wreath form. If you're new to the work wreath forms, they come to you just like this. We're going to point those upper level ties towards the center of the wreath and those lower level ties pointing outwards. For the one roll method, of course, we're only going to be using one roll of deco mesh. I prefer to use a higher quality, and this is actually poly mesh, and it's a 10-inch roll. So the one roll method is actually a poof and curl base with very specific measurements to really maximize the use of a single roll of mesh. Okay, we're going to start on the lower level with our poofs. Here I've just rolled out a bit of my mesh. I'm scrunching and gathering that into my hand and then tucking away that raw edge to reduce the fray. We'll come to any set of lower level ties on our base, tuck that tail all the way down to the base of those ties and give them a couple of tight twists. So we've just anchored that mesh down and now we can start on our poofs. I'm grabbing a standard 12-inch ruler, and for that lower level, we're going to be making 10-inch poofs. So I've measured out to 10 inches, and guys, not looking for perfection. Give that a pinch. Come to that very next set of lower level ties, add that mesh all the way down to the base, and give them a couple of tight twists. There, we've just added our first lower level poof. Let's do one more together and then we'll jump ahead. So I've measured out to the 10-inch mark. I've scrunched and gathered my mesh. I'm coming to the next set of ties and adding that mesh all the way down to the base of those ties and giving them a couple of tight twists. We'll follow this same process all the way around the entire lower level. In case you're wondering where I get my supplies, most of them come from tmigifts.com. Make sure you enter my code Nikki20 when you check out. That'll give you 20% off your orders every time. Okay, let's get back to our wreath base. Once you've added that last poof to the lower level, it's time to jump your mesh to the upper level. We're just going to pull that mesh tautly. We'll come to the closest set of ties on that upper level, bring that mesh in behind. You can see it's a nice clean jump and secure it down into those ties. Now we can continue adding our poofs. For the upper level, those poofs will be 8 inches instead of 10, and you're going to follow the same process that we did on the lower level. So we're just going to add those 8-inch poofs all the way around our upper level, and then we'll cut away the remainder of our deco mesh roll. Now that we've got all of our upper level poofs added in, let's go ahead and cut away the remainder of the roll. Use your hand as a guard to make sure you don't accidentally cut your poofs. So this is what our wreath base is looking like right now. We've got all of our poofs added in. Let's set our wreath off to the side and then we're going to cut the remainder of our roll. I'll be using my rotary cutter today. If you don't have a rotary cutter, folks, just grab a standard ruler and a pair of scissors. But the rotary cutter, if you're new to these, they're basically like a small pizza cutter. It's going to let you cut your mesh with nice clean lines and quick. I'll leave a link for this for you below. All right, so I'm just measuring out to the 8-inch mark and I'm cutting. So we're going to cut the entire roll in 8-inch strips and then I'll meet you back here. Once all of your mesh is cut, it's time to add that into your wreath. So there are 18 sets of ties on that wreath base, and we're going to add one deco mesh curl to every set of ties. So to make that curl, folks, you're just going to grab a single piece of mesh, lay that in your workstation curl side up, roll it into a cylindrical tube. That center is probably 1 inch in diameter. And then we're going to come to any set of ties on the wreath base and add your curl to those ties. Make sure that that is seam side down and give those ties a couple of tight twists. Okay, let's add one curl to every set of ties and then we'll take a look at it. Look what a nice full base this has made for us. Okay, let's start working on embellishments and bows. Okay, let's get our bow made. We'll be using a variety of different wired ribbons and we're going to make a cascading bow that we'll be adding to the left-hand side of our wreath. You want to grab your standard 12-inch ruler, a zip tie, your scissors, and a pipe cleaner. I'm starting with that 4.5 inch wide ribbon and I'm measuring out an 8-inch tail. Then I'm pinching that ribbon, giving it a hard twist so it's always pretty side out. And now I'm going to measure out 15 inches. Then I'll pinch again and fold over under my thumb. This is going to give me a 7.5 inch loop. I'm going to repeat that one more time for one more 7.5 inch loop. So that's measured at 15 inches, scrunched and gathered and folded underneath my thumb. Now, the second tail, folks, is going to be much longer. It's about 20 inches in length. Then we'll cut away the ribbon because we're finished with this layer. Grab that pipe cleaner, and this is just a holding pipe cleaner. So give it a couple of tight twists to keep that first layer secure and set it off to the side. Okay, on to the next layer with our 2.5 inch wide ribbon. I'm measuring out a 15-inch tail, giving that a pinch, and then I'm going to measure out another 15-inch piece, scrunch and gather that, and then fold that loop over underneath my fingers and repeat one more time for a second 7.5 inch loop. And then we'll be measuring a 15-inch tail and cutting that ribbon away. Okay, let's get this to our holding bow stack over here. Let's grab that red bow, and I'm just going to untwist that pipe cleaner and carefully lay this second layer right on top and retwist that pipe cleaner. Now we can move on to the third layer. Now we'll be using a 1.5 inch wide ribbon. I'm measuring a 12-inch tail, giving that ribbon a pinch, and those loops will be 6 inches. So I've measured a 12-inch piece and then I'm folding it over underneath my hand. This time we'll be making 3 loops and 2 tails. Both tails are 12 inches in length. Once I trim that away, I'm just going to add that on top of my holding bow stack. Once we get that secured down in that holding bow stack, we're going to move on to the next layer. This will also be a 1.5 inch wide ribbon, and we're going to follow that same process, folks. 3 loops and 2 tails. Those tails are going to be measured at 12 inches in length, and we want 6-inch loops again, and so we'll be measuring at the 12-inch mark, giving it a pinch and folding it underneath our thumb. Then we'll just get that added into our holding bow stack. Okay, last layer, we're going to be using the 7/8 inch wide ribbon. I'll be making a 12-inch tail, 2 loops. Those loops will be 4-inch loops, so I'm measuring at the 8-inch mark and folding under. Since this is our last layer, go ahead and grab your 6-inch zip tie. We're going to carefully untwist that pipe cleaner, lay our last layer of ribbon on top of our bow stack, and then secure it with that 6-inch zip tie. Okay, now let me show you how to add this into the wreath. Remember, we made that extra long 4.5 inch wide ribbon tail. That's going to actually be a cascading ribbon tail. So I'm just securing my bow in a pair of those ties in the upper left-hand corner of my wreath. Now I'm going to give it a twist so it's at a pretty angle, and that short red tail is going to be pointing straight up. And that long red tail is going to be our cascading tail. So I'm going to find a lower set of ties. I'm going to pinch and gather that ribbon, leaving about 3 inches at the bottom of that ribbon. And then I'm going to secure it down into a set of ties. And that's going to give us that nice cascading flow. Here, I'm just trimming the end of that ribbon so it's a nice straight line, and then I'm going to curl it under onto itself a couple of times as tightly as I can. That just gives it a really nice, clean finish. We're going to follow that exact same process with that shorter ribbon tail that's pointing upwards. Once we get that curled under and nice and clean, then we're going to fluff out those back red loops, and we're just going to open them up so that they're nice and full. Okay, let's move on to the rest of those ribbon tails. For all of those tails, except for that 7/8 inch, I'm just going to dovetail those ends. And to dovetail those ends, folks, all you're going to do is fold that tail over onto itself, and then you're going to cut that ribbon tail on the folded side directly up diagonally to that corner. That's going to give you that pretty V shape. After I trim those ribbon tail ends, I like to just run that ribbon tail right through my fingers, pulling up towards the ceiling. That just helps give those ribbon tails a nice, elegant flow. Here, I'm just going to take that 2.5 inch wide ribbon tail and pull that off to the side and secure that down into a set of ties to give us a second cascading ribbon. So with those 7/8 inch wide ribbon, all I do is trim those ends, curl them under a couple of times for a nice clean finish, and then I like to gently roll those ribbons onto themselves, which is going to give them a whimsical curl. Okay, on to the last step. All we need to do is fluff out those loops. I like to start in the back and then work my way towards the front. All I'm doing is pulling those loops apart, side to side into an X pattern and opening those loops up until I'm happy with the look. Okay, let's move on to the next step. Okay, let's add some ribbon tails into the remainder of our ties on our wreath. So let me show you a quick way to measure out those ribbon tails. In this design, we'll be adding one ribbon tail per tie. And I like my ribbon tails to be 12 inches in length. So here I'm just measuring out to that 12-inch mark, and I'm going to fold that ribbon onto itself accordion style. And I've decided to make 8 tails of each of the 2 ribbon types here. So I'm just going to continue to fold until I've got those 8 pieces, and then I'll cut away that remainder of the roll. Then we'll trim those ribbon tail ends. Keep that stacked together, folks. Grab your scissors and a few pieces at a time, just angle trim those ends. So I'm coming down about a half an inch on the side and cutting up diagonally to the corner. Then I'll spin that bow stack around and follow that exact same process. What we're doing here is measuring, separating, and cutting the ends of our ribbon tails all in a couple of quick moves. We'll follow that same process with the second ribbon type, and then I'll meet you back here. Okay, let's get those added into our wreath base. Remember, we're going to add one ribbon tail for every set of ties on the wreath. To make a ribbon tail, folks, you're just going to take a single piece of ribbon, fold that piece in half to identify the center point, give it a pinch in the center, and then form it into a loose V over your thumb. We'll come to any set of ties on the wreath base, add that ribbon tail all the way down to the center of those ties, and give those ties a couple of tight twists to secure that ribbon tail down. We're going to want to make sure we fluff out that ribbon tail a little bit, just pulling it away from the center of. Once you get that ribbon tail added in, you'll see that I've been using those small wire snips to trim away the excess bit of ties and just remove them from the wreath. I'm also going to take my fingers and curl that little nub back and under so it's out of the way and fluffing out those tails. We'll be adding one tail to every set of ties throughout the entire wreath, alternating back and forth between the two patterns, and then I'll meet you back here. Look how stinking cute this wreath is coming together. Okay, guys, nothing says vintage Christmas like a finial. Let's get that added to the right-hand side of our wreath. This is a lightweight resin finial, so I'm actually going to anchor it down with some hot glue. I'm going to add a generous dollop of hot glue right there at the center of what used to be ties and press that finial right down in for about 10 seconds so it has a good chance to grab. Then we'll add a second dollop of hot glue at that lower set of ties that's in line with the tip of the finial and anchor that down as well to make sure it's nice and secure. Let's add some embellishments, you guys. Look how pretty these vintage beads are on this bush. We're going to grab our small snips and trim off all of those individual beads one by one so that we can anchor them down into our wreath. So every place that we had a set of ties on our wreath, we're going to actually nestle those beads down in, alternating back and forth with the colors, using just a pea-sized amount of hot glue. That's really going to give it a nice pop of color. Let's add that larger, pretty mint green bead right in the center of our bow. How stinking cute. Okay, back to adding beads to our wreath. Last but not least, I'm going to add a couple of those beads to the top of our finial just to give it a little pop of color. And this beauty is finished. What do you think?